Thank you, Fernando. So I'm Gaëtan Masson, operating agent of the Task 1 of the IEA-PVPS program. I'm also working for Becquerel Institute in Belgium. I will go through some features which have been just published today in the IEA-PVPS Trends in PV Market report. It's a report which is published every year with the most accurate information on PV market development in general. Just some words about what's the IEA-PVPS. It's basically a program from the International Energy Agency, established in 1993 already, which counts 32 members, 27 countries, plus the European Commission and 4 PV associations, and which deals with PV development. It's basically one of the most successful and most attended program of the International Energy Agency within the energy technology network of the IEA. Everything which is going to be presented today is published in the Trends 2018 in PV applications, which you can find on the IEAPVPS.org website. You can also dig into past reports which have been published from 1993 if you're interested in having a history on how PV developed in the last years. But let's go a little bit more in detail. Now we finally compiled number of installations for 2017, and they are mounted to 99 gigawatts. The major thing of the year is, of course, the fact that Asia represents now around 70% of all installations. If we count China, India, Japan, but also other countries such as Australia, Korea, Thailand, Malaysia, Taiwan, the Philippines, Indonesia, and many other countries where PV is developing. But what is even more astonishing is when we're looking at the speed at which the market developed, it's the fact that the market was multiplied by 50 in only 10 years. If we look at the 2 gigawatt market from 2007 until the 99 gigawatts market from last year, we see a tremendous development which has been almost continuous. We can discuss about the numbers for 2011 and 2012, but basically when we're looking at the figure, it shows that something big is really happening with regard to PV. And of course the PV market is, and it's not the only one, is dominated by a few countries, especially China, where 54% of the installation occurred in 2017, followed by the USA, India, Japan, and a certain number of other countries where the market was smaller. I will come back a bit later on the details. If we're looking at the total installed capacity, we had at the end of 2017 more than 400, more precisely 403 gigawatts of PV installed at the end of the year, 348 in IEA-PVPS countries, and of course the rest 55 gigawatts in non-IEA-PVPS countries. It means also that the PVPS program covers rather well and continues to cover rather well the global PV market. If we're looking at grid connected versus off-grid, we had in total less than 3 gigawatts of off-grid capacity all over the world. PV started basically with off-grid, but since it started to massively develop as grid-connected applications, off-grid roughly stagnated, and we install less than 1 gigawatt of off-grid applications every year. Which is interesting is that it's becoming almost global PV market. What does that mean, almost global? If you look at the figure 5, which is called evolution of regional PV installation, you can see that basically the market in Europe is, as we all know, developed very fast in the years from 2007 to 2011, 2012, and then after that Asia took the lead. We can see that the market is growing, but still marginally smaller in the Americas, and in Africa and in the Middle East it remains extremely small, even if it's growing. And this is reflected in the figure on the right, which shows basically the evolution of the share of the first market, the top 5 market, and top 10 markets over time. What we can see is that basically in the 5 last years, around 85 to 90% of the market have been always concentrated in 10 countries. But we can also say that between 70 and more than 80% have been concentrated in 5 countries. And if we look at the number one started from around 30% in 2013 to more than 50% in 2017. It means that basically the PV market is still highly concentrated in a limited number of countries. This is also visible when we are looking at the PV penetration per capita. And of course, the larger countries have more difficulties to reach a high level of installation. And the best example is, of course, China, which is approaching slowly 100 watts per capita, even if they have more than 130 gigawatts of PV installed capacity, the first capacity installed in the world. But we also have countries where we have more than 300 watts per habitant. As I'm saying in general, it means that in these countries we have at least one PV panel per habitant. It's the case in Belgium, in Italy, in Japan, in Australia. So basically, what are the key market features? One I already mentioned is the fact that China continues to dominate the market. They installed 35 gigawatts in 2016, 33 gigawatts last year. The big question is what's going to happen this year, and I will try to come back to that in a few minutes. What is even more interesting is that the growth that we have seen, so the fact that the market jumped from 76 gigawatts in 2016 to 99 gigawatts in 2017, was basically done in a context where some countries, and not the least, declined. The US market declined. The Japanese markets declined slightly, which is a state that remained stable. The European market was roughly stable, and India grew significantly. But together, these 5 countries, a group of countries, are still smaller than the Chinese market. One interesting thing, and I will come back on that with numbers, emerging markets are growing, but basically the growth outside of China is smaller than the growth of the global PV market. It's around 15%, which is not that bad. And what I'm calling the curse of the one single market, that we've seen in the past with Spain, Germany, and that we see now with China, is there again. It means that any kind of policy decision which is taken in these countries influences dramatically the evolution of the PV market. And indeed, that's what happened in China this year. And it was something that we could have expected, that basically China decided at some point to control its own market before it would have a dramatic impact on electricity prices. And the decision that was taken in May 31, of course, helps China to control its market, but has a dramatic impact on the global PV market because of the influence of a market that represented last year more than 50% of the global PV market. The conclusion for that is clearly that we need more PV development everywhere before having a real global sustainable PV market. It's quite visible when we're looking at the top 10 countries. And something is interesting, it's basically the fact that most of the countries which were in the top 10 3 years ago were still in the top 10 last year. But we see from time to time countries where the level of installation grows, France in 2015, for instance, or Canada, and these countries disappear the year after because either their market doesn't grow or reduces. And then we have seen in 2016 Thailand and the Philippines jumping in, for instance, and also disappearing, and in 2017 Brazil and Turkey that jumped to the 5th place. Another interesting thing is the level of access to the top 10, which has progressed slightly, but it's still less than 1 gigawatt when the leader is installing more than 50%, more than 50 times this level. And if we're looking a little bit more in detail at the evolution of the market and the growth from 2015 to 2017, we can see some interesting things. I've already mentioned the decline of the US market, the stability of Japan, relative stability, slight decline, the stability of the European market. But basically what we can see is that developed countries, other developed countries like Canada, Australia, Korea are growing, but they're growing at a rather low level. They didn't represent even 4 gigawatts last year. And emerging countries or developing countries are growing as well. From 4 gigawatts installed in 2015, they went close to 9 gigawatts, 8.78 precisely, in 2017. So the question is, where is the growth going to come from in the coming years? So most probably from developing countries, but also from the markets where basically the growth stagnated and could restart in the coming years, such as the European market. And I would like to show you this, which is a figure which is not published in the trends, but which just compiles the data for China and the rest of the world. And it shows in red China, in green the rest of the world, how the Chinese market significantly contributed to the growth of the PV market, both in the utility scale segment and in the distributed segment. And that's something quite interesting. I will come back on that in a minute. It's that the growth of the distributed segment was quite significant in China, more than in the rest of the world in 2017. So we should be extremely careful when we're looking at statistics for the global PV market, because China representing more than 50%, it's a bit, as we say in French, the tree that hides the forest, or in other words, it's basically a country which is so specific that we should also look more in detail at what's happening outside of China, where the trends can be different. And one of the trends, and this is probably the most interesting in the year, is the fact that in 2017, for the first time in years, the share of decentralized or distributed PV grew for the first time and represented almost 40% of all installations against less than 30% 1 year ago. Of course, this came from China, but not only from China. And this is also a sign that the PV market is changing slowly. After 6 years of utility growth, utility scale growth only, we might see some development for distributed PV applications. And looking a little bit more in detail, here basically, if you look at the figure on the left, you can see that basically the same trend appears in all regions of the world except in Europe, is the fact that utility scale dominates distributed applications. It's exactly the opposite in Europe. In the Middle East and Africa, the level of distributed application is so small that we don't even see the bar. But there are a few dozens of megawatts installed in any case. And if you look at the figure on the right, so the cumulative evolution of PV installation for distributed and utility scale applications, it says exactly the same thing. But in another perspective, we have more than 231 gigawatts of utility scale application, more than 168 gigawatts of distributed PV application. Now, this is again something which is not published in the IEP PS Trends report, but which is something which has been done with our partners from the PV Market Alliance, including Ms. Kaizuka, who will talk after me. It shows that basically in gray you can see the idea that we had about the PV market evolution before the Chinese decision on May 31st, and how we believe this decision will impact the market in the coming years. I will not spend too much time on that, but something important is that we believe that to a certain extent, the short-term decline of the market consecutive to the decline of the market in China will be compensated starting in 2020 and after that, and that the growth of the PV market should resume. We even believe that we could reach 200 major growth compared to what happened in the past. In the last 5 years, the PV market was multiplied by a factor 3. And then what has driven this PV market development? This is a figure that is published every year now in the trends report, and it's a figure that is not changing much. And it says basically that the main policy for PV development all over the world is still feed-in tariff or financial incentives such as direct subsidies or tax breaks. If you look at the blue and the green part, they represent together almost 75% of the global PV market. Then we have some other financial incentives such as green certificates or similar RPS-based schemes, but they represent only a small 2% of the global PV market. And then we have a part for incentivized self-consumption or net metering or net billing and so on, which represent almost 10%. And if we look at the light blue part, feed-in tariffs through tenders, they still represent only 12% of the global PV market. Of course, they were the most visible ones in the news because they are those associated with extremely low value for PV electricity, but they just represent 12% of the global PV market. And when we're looking at non-incentivized PV, we're just talking about a few percent. So the road to a fully competitive PV without incentives is still far away from us. And indeed, we see many things evolving at the policies level. First, I was mentioning the distributed PV is growing, and indeed self-consumption is gaining ground. Net metering will disappear at some point, and we'll see more and more pure self-consumption schemes being put in place, despite the difficulty for policymakers to put them in place. It requires in general to adapt many regulations with regard to electricity markets, grids, and so on. That's not the goal here. There is a very interesting report from the IEPPS which has been published on the subject, and more information is contained in the national survey reports which are published on the IEPPS website. It's here that we're talking about enablers, so everything which is helping self-consumption. So we can talk about demand-side management, storage, but also electric vehicles. On the utility scale side, it moves in two directions. PPAs granted through tenders, as you have seen in the last slide, it represented 12% of the global PV installations, and it will be more in the coming years. But we might start to see, anyway, even if they're starting from a very low level, competitive installations through private PPAs or even installations selling on the electricity market. Then some countries, and starting from China, are applying very specific technologies, policies aiming at promoting some technologies. This is the so-called front runner program in China, but this exists in various forms in other places in order to also allow faster development of some PV technologies. And then we could talk about all the policies which are supporting PV development, those which are linked to renewable energy requirements, but also community solar policies, but also policies aiming at accelerating the development of enablers, such as electric vehicle policies, energy performance in building, and so on. And something which is not mentioned in this slide, and I'm coming back to self-consumption, it's the emergence of collective self-consumption, but also virtual self-consumption. What does it mean virtual? It means that I'm producing and consuming electricity in different places. So can I put PV on one building and consume it in another one while paying a fair share for grid costs? And this is part of the evolution of policies that we might see in the coming years and that we already start to see in some countries. This slide shows you the policy diversity, and I'm not going to go through that. You can find it in the report. I just would like to, before starting slowly to conclude and to discuss a little bit about prices, giving you some hints about the speed at which enablers are evolving together with PV. Of course, the first figure below the PV panels, you know it. It's one from 2016, but basically it doesn't change anything. That's the very fast speed at which PV system price declines. And it's a curve which is quite similar to the one that we see now for batteries. The cost of batteries is diminishing very, very fast due to the very fast increase, and that's the last slide, of electric vehicle production all over the world. And something which is quite interesting is that PV penetration and EV penetration are just on a parallel pace, on a parallel track for the time being. But we expect that basically EV penetration will accelerate faster than PV penetration and might even drive PV development. So if it's a revolution, is it also visible in PV numbers? Of course, 99 gigawatt is quite astonishing, but policymakers are starting to announce also very high numbers. We have seen the International Solar Alliance announcing 1,000 gigawatts, 1,000 in 2030 in emerging countries. We have seen China targeting at least 2 terawatt of PV in 2050. We have seen the Saudi Arabia, and we'll see what will happen, announcing 200 gigawatt in 2030, possibly with a part used for producing solar fuels. We have seen Spain changing completely its mind and going up to 77 gigawatts, France to 45, but there are also plenty of other countries which have announced significantly high numbers. And there are also very interesting announcements with regards to electric vehicles, but it's not the place to discuss it. So, just to discuss a little bit about price, the short-term outlook is a bit complicated. We hope that it will finish well. But why is it complicated? It's complicated because prices are going down. And this is a figure which we are publishing for the second year in a row, which shows basically 100% of the global PV market, so the 99 gigawatts in 2017, with the system prices which are associated to that. And what you can see is that basically when we're talking about very cheap PV system price, we're talking about super competitive tenders. And then the prices are going up for utility scale PV and their feed-in tariff that we have seen mostly in China, for instance, this year. But we also see that we have a part of the market, which is roughly 1/3, where the prices are higher or significantly higher. It's the part for rooftop PV, but also for emerging applications. And even if we have seen component prices, especially module prices, going down very fast, the question is whether these prices are, I would say, sustainable. And I will just drop to that one, and I will let Izumi Kaizuka presenting the state of the industry afterwards. But I just looked this morning at average numbers, average prices for PV modules, and for multi-crystalline PV modules, we see prices down to below $0.2, not US dollar cents, but US dollar per watt. And basically the question is it sustainable? And who can produce at this cost level? And it would just mean that basically some innovative business models taking advantage of the extremely low cells wafer of polysilicon prices on the market are developing for the time being. The question whether the costs are going to continue going down is extremely simple. Yes, they will. But the other question is, do we need to go significantly below the current cost to be competitive? And in many segments and many countries, the question is, PV is already competitive. And I will finish with that. I was talking about revolution below, and I think this revolution has just started. PV represents 2.5% of the electricity demand in the world, so it starts to be visible. And basically, we can expect from PV to develop in many applications, from simple modules to PV in buildings, integrated or not integrated, but also on roads, floating PV, agricultural PV, urban furniture, car, trains, planes. We can imagine everything we want because PV is going to be everywhere, almost, or the cheapest source of electricity in this century. And that's something that I wanted to highlight before finishing, is that why is it so important to develop PV? It's also a question of fighting climate change. We have calculated this year in the trends report what PV contributed to in terms of saving of CO2 emission or greenhouse gases and emission in 2017. And it's basically almost 250 million tons of CO2 which have been saved thanks to the 403 gigawatt of PV. It's the equivalent of 140 million cars which would have been taken off the road. Just to give you an idea, we're selling almost 100 million cars a year, so the road is still long before decarbonizing it. Or it's also the equivalent of planting 164 million trees every year, and that's the sign that PV has reached a size which is not negligible anymore. We represent $110 billion in turnover every year throughout the world. We have more than 400 gigawatts installed, but it's just the beginning. I thank you for your attention.
Great, thank you very much, Gaetan, for your presentation. So we can now go ahead with Izumi. So Izumi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm connecting from Tokyo, and now actually it's in the night, so maybe you will hear some traffic sounds because of the traffic jam around my office. But I try to give clear voices. Um, my presentation is based on IEA PBPS trends report, but now it's December in 2018, so I included some of the latest figures from my company's latest analysis. So I'd like to briefly want to introduce you to my company. My company based in Tokyo, established in 1983. Since then, we are working for the industry and also tracking the industry as well. Okay, here is my contents. First, I'd like to show you some of the highlights from the IEA PBPS trends just published. And then I'd like to tell you about what the PB industry is facing now. Mainly the impacts of the Chinese policy that already Gaeton explained about the policy change issued in May 31st. Then I'd like to add some facts about trade conflicts, mainly focusing in the safeguard measures in USA and India. Then I summarize my presentation. So before I give you the charts and figures, I'd like to explain how we conduct analysis of the industry part. The information is based on the national survey report from each member country, but sometimes it's not sufficient, and also the PB manufacturing is conducted in non-member countries like Taiwan, Singapore, so that we compiled those information from my company's primary survey, and also we use available information and figures from the industry associations or press releases of the companies, etc., etc. So this is some highlights from the PB trends report. In 2017, almost 133 gigawatt of the PV module producing capacity is reported, and the production was over 100 gigawatt. But remember, Gaeton told last year's installation capacity was 99 gigawatt. The manufacturing capacity in 2017 is sufficient to provide the level of such demand. But in 2018, the production figure is still under study, and in our analysis, the production capacity in the end of this year may reach very close to the 150 gigawatt based on the company's announcement. So because of the Chinese policy change, some companies changed the production enhancement plan. So maybe next year we will see more precise numbers. But they're thinking about the reduction of the Chinese market. We still have the sufficient production capacity worldwide. I will talk later about the impact of the Chinese policy change in more details. But now I can say the gap of the demand and manufacturing capacity expanded in this year. Next slide shows the production share by country in 2017. So in case of the cell, China, of course, dominates the market. The second country is Taiwan, where the cell-dedicated manufacturers are quite active. Then the third place, Malaysia, comes. So in case of the PV modules, the top three countries are different. Of course, number one is China. But the second country is South Korea, mainly because of the Hanfa Q cells manufacturing capacity. Then Malaysia ranked third in both in cell and module production. In Malaysia, several major companies now operating the production factories there because of the Malaysian government has a very successful program of the foreign direct investment. And also the trade conflicts contributed to their growth of the manufacturing capacity. And now I'd like to show the trends of the cell production volumes by country. South Korea or Malaysia or Taiwan and of course China increased the production volumes. But on the other hand, US, Germany, Japan, the production volume is quite small. But I think because of the trade conflict, safeguard measures in U.S., maybe the U.S. manufacturing capacity will increase soon. So next slide shows the more on the individual manufacturing companies. So as I said, the 2018 figure is not ready, but I put the ranking of the first half of the 2018. So every year we have different companies in the top 10 ranks, but the 2017 and 2016, Jinko Solar kept number one position. And I think also the 2018, the Jinko will keep the first position with more than 10 gigawatt of the PV module shipment. And in 2017, becoming to top 5 players, at least 5.5 gigawatt of the shipment required. But maybe next year, the top 1 company shipped more than 10 gigawatt, and many companies planning more than 5 gigawatt of the PV module shipment. So I think the level requires ranking in top 10 or top 5 will be increased. Also, the consolidation of the industry is starting. That also affects the ranking as well. If we look the PV module production capacity by the major companies, the red bar shows this year's production capacity, including planned capacity. So as I said, Jinko Solar's capacity will exceed 10 gigawatt. Then the Hanfa or Canadian or Trina or JA, they will have the more than 8 gigawatt of the capacity. But because of the Chinese policy changes, some companies are not to disclose the future plans, but very aggressive companies like Longi, they are planning to have the 20 gigawatt of the production capacity by 2020. If we look the production capacity of major companies along the value chain, you can see the strategy of those companies are totally different. They are all of the companies are crystalline silicon manufacturers. Traditionally, the major module manufacturers invest in the wafer, cell, and module capacity. But now, more and more companies have a strategy for the flexible manufacturing capacity, and also the some part of the cell or warehouse sourcing outside of the companies. The Longi, originally the wafer manufacturers, now their plan is having more than 45 gigawatt by 2020. So the ergonomy of the wafer manufacturing is now advancing, and the company like Stoneway, they are dedicating the cell production, and because of these cell-dedicated companies, the PV module manufacturers can reduce the cost reduction or strategically manufacturing PV modules in locations outside of the China. So I think due to more and more pressure on cost reduction, the strategy will changing, and especially some companies stopped investing wafer production and announced the withdrawal of the wafer production. So we will see the more changes in the future. So I only talked about the crystalline silicon manufacturers. Here I'd like to tell you more about the thin film situations. This chart is from PVPS trends report. In 2017, around 3.3 gigawatt of the thin film PV was produced. The share is less than 5%. And among the 3.3 gigawatt of the production, the cadmium telluride thin film PV accounts around 80%, mainly from First Solar, U.S. company. And remains are mainly from the CIGS productions. And among CIGS production manufacturers, Japanese Solar Frontier has the largest production volume and also the manufacturing capacity. And we found the thin film manufacturers also working on the production capacity enhancement. The largest producer, the First Solar, is now planning to have the 7.6 gigawatt year capacity by the end of the 2020. And in China, production activities of the CIGS are getting very active. For example, Chinese building material company, CNBM, now has the CIGS manufacturing capacity with the partnership of the Germany company. And they are now planning to extend the production capacity up to 1.5 gigawatt. At now the share of the thin films remains small, but I think the new applications such as the building integrated PV or lightweight PV modules of the flexible substrate, they will develop the new market in the future. And if all the announced capacity of the thin films will be implemented in near terms, I think the share of the thin films will increase up to 10% in the future. So now I'd like to move to the trends of the two big trends and its impact in the market and the industry in this year. The first one is the Chinese policy change and also the trade conflicts. With these two issues reflect the intensity of the political decision still gives a big influence on the PV market and industry. So I will give the more details of the Chinese political changes. So this year, in the end of May, the Chinese government issued new policy announcement. It was from the three key organizations, the National Development and Reform Commission, National Energy Administration, and the Ministry of the Finance together. The policy consists of the three key pillars. One is giving the cap of the distributed PV projects. In 2017, around 20 gigawatt of the distributed PV was installed in China, but the new policy direction, the cap was set only for, and the volume is that only 10 gigawatt. And when this announcement was issued, already the 10 gigawatt of the distributed PV was installed. So after this direction, the distributed PV market is not so active in China. And also, suddenly the government cut the feed-in tariff. Before, once a year, the feed-in tariff was set, but all of a sudden, from the 1st of June, the new lower feed-in tariff was applied to the older projects. And also, the Chinese government announced all the utility scale project was project quota by the provinces abolished, and instructed to stop the projects seeking feed-in tariff. So the last year, China installed 53 gigawatt, and the outlook of the Chinese market this year dropped to 30 gigawatt to 40 gigawatt. The pessimistic outlook is just 30 gigawatt. But the announced capacity expansion is more than 10 gigawatt. So the price erosion was expected and really happened. So this shows the stock prices after the 31st of May. You see the sudden drop of the PV companies' stock prices. So right after the announcement, the market immediately reacted. But at now, we saw the Chinese market installed more than 30 gigawatt by the end of the third quarter. The growth is minus 20% on year-on-year comparison. But so far, the market is not so pessimistic than the stakeholders expected in the end of May. However, still the impact of the price is very remarkable. So looking back to the Chinese dominance of the crystalline silicon value chain, this is the figure from the Chinese Photovoltaic Association. Not only for cell and modules, the polysilicon or warehouse Chinese company, especially in warehouse, has a huge market shares. So not only cell and PV modules, throughout the value chain, we saw the drop of the prices. But as Keiton said, outside of the China, market growth in the developing countries is expected, but the speed of the growth is not so fast. So as a result, now the PV module prices reached 20 cents per watt, US cent level recently. And the standard poly is very close to 20 US cent per watt. And the high efficiency modules like using the pack cells are a little bit higher, but still remains around 22 to 24 US cent per watt. So this current price level is the lower than the former targets of the manufacturing cost of the PV companies. Sorry, some Japanese remains, but this chart shows the module manufacturing cost in 2017. The 2017, for example, the major producer like Canadian Solar, they are targeting achieving the 25 US cent per watt in 2020. So mostly the current level of the cost reduction is achieved lower polysilicon price as well as wafer and also the solar cells. This means that I think the margin of the PV manufacturing is now very thin. So PV industry needs to depart from the cost competition and escape from the vicious circle of lowering profit. In these circumstances, industry needs to seek the different approach for PV power cost reduction. So before, I think the scale of the economy dominate the cost reduction. But at this level, I think the manufacturers need to work on the more on the higher performance or reliability of the products. Of course, major companies are working on these directions. So far, the crystalline silicon PV modules regarded as a commodity, but still I think have room for the improvement. This figure shows the difference between the commercial production solar cell efficiency and also lab-scale solar cell efficiencies. So now many companies are shifting to PARC, and according to the recent analysis of the energy trend, PARC's capacity in this year reaching more than 17 gigawatt and 19 gigawatt in next year. However, I have some questions. How sustainable this industry? Because of the very thin margins, the new investment for new technology is getting very difficult. So I hope the manufacturing sector can escape from the vicious circle of the lower margins and establish a more sustainable framework of the manufacturing. And this slide is a bit busy. I picked up the solar cell trends in the previous slide, but here I'd like to show the other efforts on PV technology improvement in the upstream sector. And as well as crystalline silicon manufacturers, the thin film manufacturers are working on the high efficiency or lower cost, or the developing flexible substrates for the BIPV products. And these efforts should make the differentiation of the products. But if I think over the entire PV industry, now maybe now is a very severe winter for the supply side. But now downstream industry is enjoying lowering price of the PV modules. This figure shows the recent PPA prices from the trends report. Already Gaeton said PV is competitive, but the current price reduction contributes more and more development of the global new market. Then I'd like to a little bit change the issues. Also, I think that these new applications, the manufacturer can make differentiation of the products. But because of the limitation of the time, I'd like to go to the trade conflicts over PV. This figure shows some of the trade conflicts by region. But recently, in Europe, the minimum import price and duties for PV modules are terminated. But in US and India, the safeguard measures are implemented. So I'd like to give you a short explanation of these measures. The US President decided the safeguard measures against imported crystalline silicon PV modules. And I think that according to the NREL analysis, the 10 US cent per watt of the utility increase of the PV module cost is expected. So I think that in the near term, the US production capacity will increase, and already some of the major companies like Jinko or Hanwha announced the module production plan in US. And next, I'd like to show the safeguard duty status in India. Now, India, the third largest country, imposes the solar cells imposed duties in China and Malaysian-made PV modules. The term of the safeguard duties is not so long, so the impact may limited. But these measures, already some of the major manufacturers thinking the production site in India. But in case of India, the most, as shown in the right figure, the domestic production volume remains very low. So this may affect the this may affect the growth of the Indian market. And because of those trade conflicts, I expect the manufacturing site will be more and more diversified. And the current levels of the PV module price may need to have production near the market. Okay. So this is my last slide. I believe that now industry is facing the difficulties, the upstream industries. But always risks create opportunities. And the shaking out or consolidation will continue, but the cost reduction pathway will change. And I think the focus should be shift from the economy of the scale to the technological performance. And also the industry needs to work on the differentiation. And finally, the PV competitiveness will open the new market. But I think that considering this situation, we need to redefine the bankability of the PV modules. Thank you for your attention. And I'd like to thank to NEDO, Japanese Research and Development Agencies, because of the supporting the PVPS activities.